A very good morning to all of you. I'm very delighted to join you all today in the second day of the Sustainable Policy Institute Symposium, which discussing a very important and relevant theme on how we can revolutionizing finance for net zero. This is a very topical, very strategic and important issue. In this session, we are specifically discussing the role of Asia Pacific countries in scaling up green investment, capital, and monetary policy. As we are all aware of the performance of the Asia Pacific countries, or APAC, as the world's fastest developing region, we are also acknowledged that the fact that we may well be the most exposed with the climate risk. Climate hazard across the world will inevitably exacerbate the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that we are still currently facing and have a very significant in reducing our community resilience and overall economic livelihood. The pandemic COVID-19 has set us back several years on the various development agenda in which the world has set out to achieve under the Sustainable Development Goals. While stimulus and vaccines have become the game change that help in paving the way of the economic recovery, as well as the resilience of the economy, the region's progress on vaccination remains uneven. And also the lacks of the rollout, which is happening also in some advanced countries. We all know until end of August, 28.7% of the region population had been fully vaccinated. Compared to, for example, the United States, which has already achieved 51.8%, which is vaccinated, or the European Union, in which 58% of the population have been vaccinated. So for the region, it is still lag behind. The World Bank report shows that despite this year pick up, the level of global GDP in 2021 is expected to be 3.2%, below pre-pandemic projection. And per capita GDP among many emerging countries and developing economies is anticipated to remain below pre-pandemic COVID-19 peaks for an extended period. It is under these uncertain circumstances that we are now expected to be adaptable and innovative. The APAC share common goals of achieving net zero carbon emission and also forming a climate resilient future, which are critical to sustainable development and economic growth. Indonesia is proud to be among the committed countries for climate action. Our nationally determined contribution, which is commitment to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 29% with our own resources and 41%, which can be scaled up to 41% reduction of the CO2 emission with international support by 2030. This commitment certainly require a lot of effort and definitely requires significant funding. Through climate budget tagging, we now know how big is the gap on this financing. I believe most countries have a similar situation with Indonesia on the climate finance. I will give you an example. Our state budget over the last 5 years, from 2016 to 2021, showing that we allocated around 4.1% of the total state budget for climate action. And this is mainly for the mitigation. However, this amount can only finance 21.3% of the total funding which is required to achieve national determined contribution target. So the role of private sector is definitely very important and critical to fill this financing gap. We believe that the urgency of green financial policy reform has reached beyond the responsibility to meet our commitment to the Paris Agreement and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal. How we can attract more private sector financing is going to be very critical. With the economic focus now to recover post-COVID-19 or from the pandemic COVID-19, Indonesia also have challenges as well as opportunity to implement a low carbon transition during the economic recovery process. The transformation which can design sustainable growth as well as improving prosperity, while at the same time also addressing the pandemic is very critical. UNFCCC has noted that 1.5 billion workers will be affected by this transition. And in accordance with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement concept, social inclusion will continue to influence, shape, as well as direct various collective effort related to climate change and human development. If we are all want to have no one leave behind principle, in this transition process, we need to have a good environmental, social, and government management that ensure equitable low carbon transition can be built. The objective is to generate sustainable growth, but also at the same time, increasing employment, reducing inequality, and also addressing sustainability. The low carbon transition will only be successful with the involvement of the government and also all important stakeholders. Private sector and community should definitely be included. This is especially true for the indigenous people and local community, which have an extensive knowledge as well as understanding about how they can use the natural resources in a sustainable way. If we involve a diverse community representative in the project development process, then the developers can contribute to strengthen the resilience, empowering the indigenous as well as local community, and at the same time developing sustainable and resilient livelihood. This doesn't mean that we are compromising with the objective of designing a sustainable development goal. Ladies and gentlemen, issues related to climate change and sustainable development cannot be solved individually, not even one country. It definitely requires global collective commitments. These issues have massively become a priority agenda in many international forums that I attended, including in the G20 forum, which Indonesia is going to host and to take the presidency beginning 2022. The Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Change, as well as the Task Force Climate Change under the G20, they are all focusing on how the financing aspect of climate change should and could be addressed. The G20 forum, where Indonesia is going to hold the presidency, also take this sustainable finance at the center stage. Sustainable finance is a key to achieve climate action or to facilitate climate action. Indonesia is committed to continuing this agenda and ensure that the G20 cooperate effectively with institutions and with the working group, as well as other relevant international organizations. Indonesia, and especially the Ministry of Finance, together with Finnish Ministry of Finance, are the co-chair of this coalition of finance ministers for climate action. This coalition is a very important forum to support collective effort of the finance ministers from member countries in employing fiscal policy, public finance management, and climate change finance mobilization in order to encourage climate change action at the domestic as well as the global level. This is also a forum in which we can exchange experience and information related to fiscal and economic policy, which is related to climate change. Under one of their coalition work area, we also recognize that to unlock future climate finance, environmental and climate change aspect should be considered in the investment and lending decision of private finance. We find that the main challenges in the commitment to align private investment with the Paris Agreement is on the operationalization due to the different scopes and ambition. The Ministry of Finance also play an active role in the joint effort between the government of Indonesia and the government of United States. Our ministry working closely with many partners. With the United States, we discuss on the climate change task force as the coordinator of the working group for sustainable and blended finance. This working group, that is Working Group 4 Task Force Climate Change, or TFCC, aims to support Indonesia in achieving our national determined contribution target. And that means if this support is going to be effective, Indonesia has a huge opportunity to increase our contribution in reducing emission by 41%. The TFCC Working Group 4 focus on attracting private involvement in achieving the nationally determined contribution target. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Indonesia has carried out several policy reforms in order to attract private investment on this sustainable sector. One, through the enactment of Omnibus Law on Job Creation. This is the first omnibus law which is produced in Indonesia that contain especially the reform of several or many law and regulation that hampering the investment in Indonesia. Certainly with this omnibus, Indonesia really want to create an investment climate which is favorable for investors. And at the same time, we are also paying a very important attention to the environmental and social aspect. The policy was followed by the establishment of Sovereign Wealth Fund for in Indonesia, or we call it Indonesia Investment Authority, in order for us to be able to attract and secure more investment opportunity, including investment in the sustainable sectors. Indonesia will not waste the current crisis, never waste the crisis. We take advantage of this pandemic crisis by accelerating our momentum to reform, to accelerate our recovery and promote more sustainable development approach. The government continue to increase our sustainable production capacity and also through accelerating infrastructure connectivity, mobility, and productivity. So let me now speak on the fiscal policy side. The government has also made taxation reform, even during and in the middle of this pandemic crisis. A package of economic policy and fiscal stimulus has been approved by our legislator. Tax reform is expected to improve and to be passed, and this will improve equity aspect. It will also increase the domestic resource mobilization and to strengthen the business ecosystem in Indonesia. We have also issued several tax incentives in order for us to be able to incentivize sustainable environment investment for low carbon economy. We use our tax incentive, for example, like tax holiday, tax allowance, and VAT facility to promote renewable energy management or production and non-hazardous waste and organic chemicals. The latest is the issuance of our tax regulation on the sales of luxury goods and electric vehicle and the use of battery for electric vehicle, which is currently becoming a very important and critical investment in Indonesia. Since 2016, on the fiscal side, we also starting to tag our budget related to the climate budget tagging. This is including for us to use as a reference of a series green sukuk issuance. Since 2018 to 2021, the government has already issued sovereign global green sukuk annually with a total financing is now accumulated to 3.5 billion US dollar. Climate budget tagging providing us with a very important consistency and information which is credible for underlying green sukuk. In addition to this, the retail green sukuk also has been issued since 2019 to 2020, which succeeded in mobilizing the total investment up to 490 million US dollar. With this success, the Ministry of Finance also now initiated for our regional government to start having regional climate budget tagging. We are now already providing a guidebook for the local government so that they are going to be able to consistently identify their local budget for the climate change program. We currently have 11 pilot provincial as well as city in Indonesia starting 2020. And we are now in 2021 adding more 6 area or provincial as well as local government. With the climate change budget marking or tagging, we are all hoping that the regional government will also involve and also contribute in their fiscal strategy locally to support the climate change action and climate change agenda. The Ministry of Finance is also currently developing a climate change fiscal framework. This is the objective of the climate change fiscal framework to strengthen Indonesia's sustainable finance strategy in order to achieve sustainable development goal, including our national determined contribution. The CCFF, the climate change fiscal framework, will later be used as a policy strategy in mobilizing public and private finance for sustainable development. The Ministry of Finance of Indonesia early this month just issued our first inaugural Euro 500 million SDG bonds. This is the first ASEAN sovereign SDG conventional bond issuance and also the first SDG bond framework verified by CICERO and IISD globally. All this action highlighted that Indonesia leadership, not only just in the rhetoric and commitment to participate in addressing the issue of climate change problem, but also actively innovate on the financing and using the market globally in order for us to be able to support our climate change agenda. We do hope that this financing innovation can support Indonesia and also the global community to achieve sustainable development goals, which require 5 to 7 trillion US dollar for education, health, environment, and infrastructure. In order for us to be able to promote financing innovation, we also currently developing blended finance program. This is a set of pool of funds through what we call it a platform that we name it as a SDG Indonesia 1. This is a platform in which Indonesia Environmental Fund and disaster risk financing and insurance, which is going to create financing for any project related to the SDG. One blended finance platform will really useful for us to offer opportunity for the philanthropists, international donors, investors, commercial bank, and multilateral development bank to work together to leverage and increase the impact or the result of their financing together so that we are going to be able to achieve a better and more significant impact. With our SDG Indonesia 1 platform, which we've already established, we are currently mobilizing 3.03 billion US dollar or 3.03 billion US dollar for the partnership. The Ministry of Finance of Indonesia also currently supporting the establishment of Indonesia Environmental Fund or IEF. The IEF is a pooling funds which is collected non-tax revenue as well as the revenue which is coming from services on investment and also from our development partner. The IEF is to finance any project with the ESG aspect. This is the requirement for development partners to put their money in this pooling fund. In order for us to develop sustainable finance, it is very important for us to be able to create the feasibility of the national green project. Private sector will only participate when the project is already prepared with a sound feasibility, financial feasibility. So mechanism to prepare project is going to be very critical. The market mechanism is not yet reflecting the pricing difference between green and non-green instrument. As we can see, for Indonesia, as an issuer of our bonds, we don't really see yet the discrimination or differentiation of our bonds price if we issue in a green or non-green type of bonds. So this is one of the homework in which the market mechanism globally, which now already discussing and putting climate change as an important issue, but not yet reflecting in the pricing, which is supposed to be reflected on the instrument like the bonds in the form of better yield. So let me now discuss about carbon market. Indonesia has not yet established the carbon market. We are still preparing a mechanism so that the market mechanism for carbon can be established. And with that, certainly the pricing of the carbon can be then established. The expansion of the implementation of carbon pricing is going to be very critical for climate change policy action. If we are going to be able to reduce carbon, by and using market mechanism, what level of carbon pricing which is allow or able to facilitate both the market or the private sector and all entity to be able to transact is going to be very critical. We are learning from many other country experience, but we are optimistic that Indonesia can take a bigger role in transforming our economy through this establishment of the market of carbon. One of the plan, which is through organizing the carbon trades or carbon exchange. First, we will introduce this in some, which is very important area producing CO2, that is energy sector, as well as on the forest sector. The minimum element needed in carbon trading still need to be prepared, such as the legal basis as well as the institutional setting. We also need to prepare the reliable measurement, reporting, and verifying to achieve this greenhouse gas emission to facilitate a credible market mechanism. The system will also need to calculate emission reduction by comparing the business as usual vis-a-vis the extra effort. So these are all the building blocks for the carbon market and carbon pricing. Indonesia political commitment has been very strong. Many our counterpart also offering support for Indonesia to be able to establish and design a credible and workable carbon trading. In addition to this plan, we also currently discussing with our parliament of introducing instrument like carbon tax. This is the form of carbon pricing mechanism, which also hopefully can catalytically or facilitating the trading as well as reducing the greenhouse gas emission among the players. Carbon tax is not only to optimize state revenue, because that is not the main objective. Carbon tax is a policy instrument which we are going to be able to complement the market mechanism and the carbon price, which is currently still under the development. We are optimistic that the agenda of the fiscal side, and especially that can and will be able to generate financing for the climate change agenda, will become the most important element for Indonesia to be able to transform our economic growth with the low carbon development goals. We also understand that there are still very significant challenges. The soft infrastructure of sustainable financing, such as the development of the green taxonomy, is urgently needed by private sector to be able to provide a clear roadmap for green project in obtaining concessional funding and reducing transaction costs. In the future, the success of the green taxonomy formulation can be expanded to become the SDGs taxonomies. I would like to close this remark by stating that tackling climate change is not individual country agenda, and it is not an easy task. We can only work and successfully addressing the issue of climate change when we are working as a collective, both among sovereign and jurisdiction, as well as between public and private, whether this is on the mitigation or on the adaptation action. With this, I do hope that this kind of forum will be able to continue strengthening the collaborative and collective action among many stakeholders. I wish you all had a fruitful discussion today. Thank you.